Today, we're diving into a brand new and honestly pretty groundbreaking answer to a really old mystery. Why do some people hear voices? And let me tell you, the answer is not what you think. It's this fascinating story about a simple but really profound mistake the brain makes. So let's just start with a question that gets right to the heart of this. Just imagine for a second your own inner monologue, the voice in your head you're using to listen to me right now. What if it suddenly sounded like it was coming from someone else in the room? It's a deeply unsettling thought, right? Well, for millions of people, that's a daily reality. And that really brings us to the core of this whole experience, this feeling of having a stranger inside your own mind. This is what's known as an auditory verbal hallucination. It's this terrifying phenomenon where you hear a voice that sounds totally external, but in reality, it's actually coming from within. Now, to really solve this mystery, we first have to look back at some of the old leads, kind of like a detective story, right? For centuries, science and society have been trying to explain this, and those early theories, well, they were important steps, but they just didn't give us the full picture. Our journey to understand this has been a really long one. I mean, we went from these supernatural explanations, things like demonic whispers in ancient times, to a purely chemical theory in the 20th century, the whole dopamine excess idea. But the real breakthrough, the game changer, came when we started seeing the brain not just as a bag of chemicals, but as something far more dynamic. And this is where it gets really interesting. We get this game-changing concept that completely revolutionized the investigation. This idea of the brain not as some passive receiver of information, but as a proactive prediction machine, almost like a crystal ball for reality. Okay, so let's unpack that. What on earth does it mean for the brain to be a predictive machine? Well, it means your brain isn't just sitting back waiting for sights and sounds to come to it. No, it's constantly, and I mean constantly, guessing what's about to happen next based on everything it's ever learned. It builds this little model of the world and only really pays close attention when reality doesn't match its prediction. So here's how it works in basically 3 simple steps. First, your brain predicts what it's about to see or hear or feel. Then, it senses the actual real-world input. And finally, the most important part, it corrects. It compares the two, notes the difference, what scientists call a prediction error, and it uses that surprise to update its internal model, just getting better and better at guessing what reality is. And it's this framework, this new way of thinking, that finally allowed scientists to crack the case. They found the exact mechanism that fails. They found the missing piece of evidence, something you can think of as a kind of internal digital signature. Now, that signature has a fancy scientific name. It's called a corollary discharge, but it's a technical term for something beautifully simple. When your brain is about to do something, like think of thoughts or say a word out loud, it sends a little memo to its own sensory departments to label that upcoming sensation as made by me. It's basically the brain's way of putting its own stamp on its work. You can almost imagine the corollary discharge as the brain whispering to itself, right? It's saying, hey, listen up. The sound you're about to hear, that's my own work. It's from me. So don't be surprised, just stand down. And right here, this is the aha moment. This is the crucial difference. In a typical brain, a thought is generated, that digital signature is sent, and the brain goes, yep, that's me, and correctly identifies it as self. But in schizophrenia, that signature goes missing. The thought is still generated, that part is the same, but without that internal memo, the brain is genuinely surprised by it. It experiences a prediction error, and it does the only thing it can. It misclassifies its own thought as an external, unfamiliar voice, a stranger. You see how this just reframes the entire experience with so much more empathy? It suggests that what we've been calling a hallucination isn't really the brain making something up from thin air. It's the brain failing to recognize its own creation. It's a system error, a simple but truly profound misclassification. As the source material calls it, the brain's sad mistake. So solving one part of this puzzle just opens up an entirely new chapter. And this discovery, it points toward a future that is full of absolutely incredible promise, for sure, but it also raises some really complex, really tricky ethical dilemmas. And the trade-offs here are pretty significant. On one hand, you've got this incredible promise. We could potentially use tech like brain-computer interfaces to go in and correct this broken circuit. But that leads us to the peril. How do we protect something like neural privacy if we're accessing inner thoughts? Then, on the other hand, this new perspective is amazing for reducing stigma, but it also risks what you might call mechanistic reductionism, this danger of seeing the incredibly complex human mind as just a machine that needs fixing. Which really leaves us with this final, powerful question. Once we have the tools to actually edit the brain's predictive models and correct its errors, who gets to decide what's an error to be fixed and what's just a unique, maybe even valuable feature of the human experience? It's a huge question, and it's one we're all going to have to think about as this science moves forward. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer.